A little bit of a musical interlude. But I'm sure most of you are familiar with that tune. We know what I saw a few of you kind of rocking it out a little bit, enjoying. That's okay. Hey Jude, a well-known song, great song by the Beatles. I'm not a Beatles historian, so I did a little bit of looking. But that song is going to provide a little bit of a segue, a little bit of a link into our next 2 weeks as we study the letter of Jude in the Bible. And you may not know that song or the background to that song, so I did a little bit of digging. And I came to understand that song written by Paul McCartney was written during the time of John Lennon's divorce. And John Lennon had a son named Julian. And I'm sure as any of you who've ever been through a divorce with children just know how hard and how difficult that is. And so Paul McCartney, being a really good friend of the family, was really feeling broken by all of this. And so he wanted to reach out to Julian and to comfort him and to bring some sort of encouragement to him. And so on the way to Julian's home, this song began to become real in his mind. And so we're aware of perhaps that first line that originally was, "Hey Jules, don't make it bad. Take a sad song and make it better." Changed to "Hey Jude," it must have sounded better. I'm no music writer, so I'm not going to dispute that. But what we see in this song is an encouragement. An encouragement in the midst of a difficult and challenging time. Similarly, this letter of Jude, which is the second last book in the Bible, perhaps at times is not read often, or if it is, we kind of read through it quickly because there's a number of just historical references biblically in there, and it's some challenging language that is being used. But it too, not a song, but is a letter of encouragement at a particularly challenging time for the early church. A struggle that they are going through that Jude is actually afraid that they may not even be aware of what is happening. And so a little bit of his historical background. Jude is believed to be the stepbrother of Jesus. So he too had the parents of Mary and Joseph. So he knew Jesus very well. Would not have been one of his 12 apostles. So he would have seen Jesus' life. He would have known his ministry. He would have seen just the growth of the early church, because this letter by Jude was written approximately 30 years after Jesus' death and resurrection. And so 30 years has gone as the early church has begun to grow, has begun to expand, and has begun to experience significant challenges and struggles along the way. Both from without, persecution from others around, and also from those within. And the next 2 weeks, I want to focus on this one phrase that Jude uses at the very beginning of his letter to kind of help us come to a better understanding, regardless of if you're someone who is a follower of Jesus, who is holding on to the faith, or if you're someone who perhaps is exploring faith. Perhaps wondering, what does it truly mean? What does it truly look like to live all of life with Jesus? Because my worry at times is when we present Christ to others, there may be a little bit of a bait and switch. In the sense of, we present it in a way that if you give your life to Jesus, if you start suddenly following him, that suddenly there'll be no more struggles. There'll be no more difficulties. Everything will just be good and easy. And anyone who knows a life lived with Jesus knows that's not the case. What is the case is that Jesus does say, if you live life with me, I will give you the abundant life. I will give you a life truly worth living. I will give you meaning. I will give you purpose. I will give you ultimate satisfaction that you can find nowhere else. But it doesn't mean that it comes without struggle. And so if we fall into the camp of thinking, if I have faith, then I cannot have struggles or difficulties, not only in life, but even with my own faith, then That's not the gospel. Because in the very opening line, Jude says, listen, I wanted to write to you about something else. I had something else on my mind. I wanted to celebrate with you all the good things that were happening, but instead I'm writing to you to contend for the faith. Contend for the faith. I kind of let that phrase just kind of run through my mind this week and try to get to a better understanding of what exactly does it mean. And the place I found myself was Jude saying, I want you to struggle for the faith. I want you to fight for the faith. And when I think of struggles, when I think of contending, when I think of competing for something, you realize that it's not going to come easy, but you also realize that you only struggle and contend and fight for things that you deem worthy and valuable. If there's struggles or difficulties in life and you don't think it's really valuable to pursue, then you just walk away. And so Jude is saying, I want you to struggle. I want you to contend for the faith. Because he clearly holds to the reality of just the value of a life fully lived in the presence of God. That's what I love about the Bible. You know, so often we may not always understand the references or some of the language, but we see the relevance of the Bible yet again in the letter of Jude, written 2,000 years ago to a completely different audience, spoken in a different language. But here we see the very same reality that I know I wrestle with, that I'm sure you wrestle with as well, and that is the struggles of faith. And so what is Jude highlighting? He begins by simply stating what he sees as the obvious. He says, I want you to struggle for the faith because subtly what is happening is you're changing the grace of God into a license of immorality. And you are denying Jesus Christ as your only sovereign Lord and King. And so as I break that down, the struggle I think that the people that Jude is speaking towards are facing is one, the struggle of lifestyle. If I believe in Jesus, and I believe in the grace and the forgiveness and the mercy, and I'll show you a verse that says, you know, God will forgive all of my sins and wash away all of my iniquities. Question, does it really matter how I live? I mean, let's be honest, you can't read the teachings of Jesus and not start to wiggle a little bit and look for a loophole and look for an out clause. Because there's some things that Jesus says that stops me in my tracks. And I'd be a liar to say that I do not struggle with a lot of what he has to say. Right off the hop in the book of Matthew, one of the biographies, one of the Gospels of Jesus, the very beginning of his ministry, as people are starting to come and are starting to follow him, and they've seen the miracles, and they've heard some of the teachings, and they think, wow, Jesus is amazing, he's incredible. And it's like Jesus says, okay, let's just call a timeout for a moment. Let's sit down on the grass, get comfortable. I want to talk to you a little bit about what the Jesus life is going to look like. And you probably see people wide-eyed and think, okay, here we go, this is going to be great. It's often referred to as like the Sermon on the Mount. And Jesus says, you know, if you want to follow me, I want you to love your enemies and pray for the people that are going to hurt you. Huh. All right, Jesus, what else you got for us here? Okay, let's not just wade into the water. Let's just jump right in. Where are we at? Jesus says, you know what? I want you to forgive, not once, not twice, but over and over and over and over again. But Jesus, what about this scenario? No. I want you to forgive. Okay. Starting to struggle. starting to struggle a little bit. Then he says, you know what? You've heard it said that if you commit adultery or anger, that's not a good thing. You think, okay, now Jesus, you're talking my language. I haven't committed adultery. I haven't murdered anyone. I'm good. All right, let's talk more about this, more intangibles. He's like, I just want you to let you know that if you lust after someone in your heart, that's the same as adultery. If you're angry towards your brother, that's murder. It's like, Jesus, back up the train here. What are you talking about? And as you read more and more the reality of Jesus, faith is a struggle. It is a struggle to live the Jesus life. That in one hand, I live with this reality of it's the abundant life, but I'm going to have to fight for this. I'm going to have to work for this. And so how will I live? In Jude's day, what was happening was they were wrestling with this as well. But that wasn't the only issue. Jesus says, not only am I calling you to a different way of life, I'm calling you to believe completely in me. To make me the Lord and King of your life. To not dabble in other faiths, to not dabble in other beliefs, but to give yourself solely and completely to me. And in Jude's day, as it is in our day, you take a step back and say, but that's exclusive. That's not necessarily culturally acceptable. And Jesus is like, I want you to follow me with everything that you got. And this was the struggle for the early church that I would suggest is just as much a struggle for us here today. And so what do we do when things seem too intense? What do we do when things maybe just seem to be too hard or too difficult? We water it down. We start to round the edges a little bit. And I think what Jude is speaking into the lives of those first followers of Jesus, the very same words that he's speaking into us, he says, be aware of watered down religion. Where you take Jesus, but not completely. You try to round the edges. You try to sand off some of the corners. You try to make it a little bit more palatable. But Jude says there is a danger in this. The early church was facing significant persecution, but Jude had nothing to say about that. Rather, he was talking about the danger and the subtlety from within. And so Jude's letter is almost like an intervention. I'm not sure if you've ever been a part of an intervention. I have not. But an intervention is when you step into someone's life and speak truth out of love because you're afraid of the path that they're going down. And you have to have this intervention because the person you're speaking to cannot see it for themselves. And so that's exactly what Jude does. He begins citing historical examples that you can find in the Bible as to the challenge of others who have walked in disobedience, who have failed to follow God in all they do. And you can look at them, and this is one of the dangers of sin. You can look at others and you can look at other situations and think, whoa, they're going down a dangerous path, but not me. There's a number of examples that he gives. I'm just going to kind of pull out two. But he talks about the nation of Israel. He says, you know the story of God's faithfulness, of how the people of God were living in Egypt, yet then they became oppressed and they became slaves, and God came in and saved them and desired that they would follow him, and he promised them this amazing, abundant life in the promised land. I mean a land flowing with milk and honey. That may not be too enticing to you here today, but clearly that was the descriptions that would kind of make people go, yeah, we want that. It took them 40 years to get from Egypt to the land of Canaan. I majored in geography in university, and even if I didn't, I can tell you a journey by foot from Egypt to Canaan, to the promised land, should not take decades, perhaps weeks. And so what was it? It was because of their failed obedience, their unwillingness to follow God in all of life. When God would say one thing to them, they would say, okay, but I don't know if that's really going to work for us. We're going to do something else. And God says, if you fail to follow me in all of life, there's going to be consequences. There's going to be a reality. And as a result, no one over the age of 20, when they left Egypt, ever saw the glory of the promised land. No one. He gives another example, perhaps is familiar to us, in that of Cain and Abel. He talks about Cain, and because of Cain's inability to follow God, even though he may not have understood what was going on, Cain gave in to his own desires, and in his anger, he murdered his brother Abel. And there were significant consequences for that. Jude goes on to talk about just the reality of when we fail to follow in the Jesus way. One of the signs is that we become more focused on ourselves. We become more focused upon, well, what is Jesus going to give to me, as opposed to what I can do for others with him at work in me. He gives three rather interesting illustrations around this. He says, when you become like this, you become like a cloud without rain. We can all kind of resonate with that one this weekend, right? We wish our clouds had a little bit less rain. You become like a cloud without rain. You become like a shepherd who only feeds himself. Or you become an autumn tree that doesn't bear any fruit. And when you take a step back and you begin to think of those examples, what he's doing is he's talking about clouds and shepherds and trees produce for the benefit of others, right? You don't want a shepherd who just sits out on the hill and looks after himself and feeds himself and doesn't look after the sheep. I mean, the sheep are there for the benefit of others. In the very same way, as beautiful as clouds are as they kind of go through the sky, they have a purpose, and the purpose is to send rain. Trees, as beautiful as they are and as wonderful they are to watch, they have a purpose of bearing fruit for the benefit of others. And the very same thing is true about the gospel. That when we follow Jesus, we realize that we are here for the benefit of others. And oftentimes what starts to niggle and work at us is we think, well, what's in it for me? Think back to the words of Jesus to tell us to forgive others. Absolutely, there's benefit to ourselves through forgiveness. But the impact that it has upon those who have offended us is immeasurable. It is incredible. And so when Jesus asks us to live a certain way, to believe a certain thing, he's not desiring to make our life difficult, but rather he is desiring to show us the path that will not only bring abundance into our life, but will bring abundance into the lives of others. I am pulled by my selfishness constantly to do what I think is of benefit to myself, to believe what I think is of benefit to myself. And I have to take a step back and think, God, if you are who you say you are, then I need to follow your path even though it seems like such a struggle, because not only will it be of greater benefit to me, it will be of an incredible benefit to others. Next week, we're going to come back and look at some more practical ways that this begins to work out in the midst of life, in our life and in the lives of others. But I think it's so important for us to understand that faith is not something that comes without struggle. I would actually suggest that in order for faith to grow, there needs to be struggle. There needs to be moments where you think, Jesus, you really want me to do this? Jesus, you really call me to believe that? I think if we're not struggling with what God is speaking into our lives, we have watered him down too much. We have stepped away too far. But a struggle is a gift from God, because we only struggle for that which we truly value and desire. But what a struggle will do will put us in a place to say, either I will pursue it more or I will step away. Which is why we need to hold these two truths in balance and in tension. The truth of the abundant life in Christ that also comes with struggle. I think we do ourselves a disservice as Christians, not only to ourselves, but to others, when we produce a relationship with God without any struggles, without any difficulties, without any challenges along the way. Because then you may find yourself in a place where suddenly you think, well, I'm struggling with this in my life. I'm having some uncertainties in this. Maybe I don't have enough faith. As opposed to framing it, perhaps struggles is not evidence of not having enough faith, but is rather God wanting to push you towards even greater faith. You can't convince me here today that there's a relationship you have that doesn't come with struggles, that doesn't come with difficulties. Whether it's with your children, whether it's with your spouse, whether it's with your in-laws, whether it's with your friends, you name a relationship that has value, and there's going to be struggles. But you continue to remain in that relationship because of what you value and what you love. Do I struggle with my kids? Absolutely. Do they struggle with me? Likely. Are those struggles going to be over anytime soon? Doubt it. But I'm in it for the long haul. One of the great images that God gives to us is the image of a father and his children. And so would it be any different with him? You see, one of the good things about struggles, about realizing that I can't do this on my own, is it prevents us from just moralistic living. Of thinking, well, if I just try harder, if I just work harder, if I just believe more. No. Struggles point us back into the grace of God when you suddenly come to a place and realize, I can't do this on my own. Jesus, I need you. I'm learning more and more, as much as I dislike it. Struggles can be a gift from God because they'll draw us closer to him. And that's why Jude ends with words of encouragement. At the end of our service today, we'll sing a song, and it's probably very familiar to you. It's a song that comes directly out of this passage we just read. And the opening line is, "Now unto him, Jesus, who is able to keep you from falling." That's the gift that God gives to us in the midst of our struggles, in the midst of our difficulties, in the midst of those places where we find it hard to believe or hard to live. Jesus is there with us saying, allow me to move you and to raise you up. Because if you do, your struggles will draw me closer to who I am and what I desire for you. I believe 100% that the abundant life comes from living with Jesus. Ultimate satisfaction and purpose and meaning are given by him. But I don't want to be so naive as to think it doesn't come without struggles. Because it's in the struggle that not only my faith can blossom, but others can be drawn closer to him. And so perhaps you're in a place of struggle today, whether it's a lifestyle choice that Jesus is calling you towards, whether it's something that you're struggling with in terms of belief. Remember these final words. Now unto him who is able to keep you from falling. Please stand as we sing together.